Yes, it wasn't the first Tull album that I got, but it was one that I bought at flea markets for $3 when I decided to get every single album. First one I listened to was actually War Child because my mother had bought it, and when I went through all of her albums when I was a kid, I grabbed things that, of course, looked interesting. Now, if you're familiar with the War Child, especially the back cover with all these colorful characters, I said, I love this band. I like this band already. Actually, I know I like this band because I heard the song Teacher on the radio when I was in summer camp when I was a little kid. I remember it so clearly, and I remember thinking, that guy kind of sounds like Cat Stevens, and I love Cat Stevens, but I know it's not him, and I think it's that guy Jethro Tull. How I knew this, I have no idea.
And here we are. Final episode of Season 4, everyone. And this last request comes from Brooks Smith. Like Stephen Fink, who had requested Good Old Boys on episode 90, Brooks is also an alumni of The Grapes. In fact, that's kind of how I met him, since my sister was good friends with The Grapes guitarist Ted Norton. Fun fact, when we added Brooks to the Yeti Trio, it was originally for bass, not keyboards. Eric kind of wanted to keep him on bass, which I understand. He's a great bass player. But I asked him to switch to keyboards largely on the premise that I felt really uncomfortable being the only melodic instrument. Another fun fact, the name, the Yeti Trio, comes from a lyric in the song Walk Much Hiawatha from Brooks' solo album Shape or Not Shape. And Brooks recommended a passion play by Jethro Tull. Well, kinda. See, Brooks is a Tull completist. Ian Anderson is a huge influence on the guy, so I told him all the Tull I'd already heard and asked him to tell me which one I should hear next. Let's see, my mom had Stand Up in her record collection, so I knew that. In college, I got a cassette copy of Song from the Wood, but I also got CD copies of War Child, Aqualung, and I especially like Thick as a Brick. And then in high school, I had also gotten a copy of Crest of a Knave because the radio was playing Farm on the Freeway a lot, and I like that. Farm! And looking at the LP of a passion play, it looks like it might be similar to Thick as a Brick, in that there are no song titles listed. And this is fun. In the little playbill that's in the gatefold, it looks like one of the characters in here, the pretend actor, is Derek Small.
On the bass, Derek Smalls. He wrote this.
And speaking of the Yeti Trio, in the technical credits on the back of the playbill, it says lighting by Eric Brooks. How wild is that? So looking ahead, it looks like between the music, the libretto, and the playbill, I've got quite a lot of material to get through this week. Not to mention that there's the original 1973 recording and also the 2014 Steven Wilson remix. Well, you know the drill by now. Brooks will keep you company while I go spin the album for the first time. Oh, farm, farm, farmy, farm, farm, farm.
What I do love about it, about the lyrics, of looking at them close up, they just seem like total nonsense. And look at the entire piece as a whole, it has a narrative that kind of makes sense. It has its own logic. He already had a vague story about a little girl dying and her adventures in the afterlife, which is not readily clear when you listen to the album. Even if you read the crazy lyrics, if you do know that, they start to make a little bit more sense. It was gonna be a movie project that fell through. That's interesting. It's significant in the history of the band, not in a good way, as being the first time they were just savaged by critics after huge success of Aqualung, and then big success of Thick as a Brick right after that. The quirky lightness of a Thick as a Brick is kind of gone from this one. It's sort of the dark other side of an entire 43 minute long song. But
so yes, stylistically, Passion Play does feel like it was made using the same philosophy as Thick as a Brick. And while there are some very musical moments all through a Passion Play, it doesn't have that super melodic hook that brings it all back together the way that first Sit This One Out section of Thick as a Brick has. But practically speaking, another consequence of the entire album being a single song is that it will be tough for me to refer to specific parts of the album in meaningful ways. The libretto breaks it into 3 sections: a Passion Play Part 1, Interlude, a Passion Play Part 2. The inserted playbill breaks it into 5 parts. Act 1, Ronnie Pilgrim's Funeral, A Winter's Morning in the Cemetery. Act 2, The Memory Bank, a small but comfortable theater with a cinema screen, parentheses, the next morning, close parentheses. Interlude, The Story of the Hare Who Lost His Spectacles. Act 3, The Business Office of G. Oddie and Son, parentheses, 2 days later, close parentheses. And Act 4, Magus Perde's Drawing Room at Midnight. But the 2014 Steven Wilson remaster actually breaks it into 15 individual tracks, using track names from the 1973 DJ pressing. So I think for the purposes of specificity, this is the format I'll be using when I address specific moments on the album. Part 1 starts with a kind of tune-up / ramp-up section, which leads to a bit of technical, pompous, but interesting prog that features something I wouldn't expect from Tull in 1973. Analog synth. When that bit finishes, we get the first of Ian Anderson's vocals on a quiet, acoustic, and melodic piece that also incorporates some tricky metric and harmonic changes. And that transitions into something else I didn't expect from 1973 Tull. A sax solo, in 11/8 even. A bit of an instrumental passage, which sounds like it can't decide which way it wants to go for a minute, but eventually lands on some English Baroque folky things. Then we get to the memory bank portion of Act 1. Here they bring back the vocals, they play around with some Lydian fourths, and they use a repeating riff with a really cool triplet bit at the end of it. More sax and more synth on this one too. Plus the multiple overdubbed flute improvisations over a killer double bass sounding thing. Also in 11. Yeah, I think this memory bank section is my favorite part of the album so far. Then after what clearly sounds like a song ending, they launch right into some King Crimson sounding unison runs, right into a heavy and dissonant and very nearly locomotive breath kind of a groove. And then after that, a little Songs from the Woods sounding folk / madrigal piece, with one synth keeping time, and another one coming and going with little arpeggiated flourishes. And now we come to the interlude, the story of the hare who lost his spectacles. Hey, do you ever notice that psychedelia from the US tends to be kind of anti-war, protest, and apocalyptic, but psychedelia from the UK tends to be Alice in Wonderland and the Wind in the Willows, fairies and gnomes and badgers and waistcoats and the like? This is just a bit of fun in the middle of the album. There might be a symbolic reason why a rabbit losing his glasses is relevant to the greater story. I'll have to look into that. But for now, though, intermission. So now we're into part 2, which starts with more of the Songs from the Woods sounding thing that ended part 1. Next is some voice and some very good acoustic guitar. Ian Anderson really is quite good at that little parlor guitar he plays. Band comes in to take up the verses over that same form, culminating in solos from sax and extremely honky guitars. One more verse, and then back down to acoustic guitar and voice. It's like that's what they did instead of track markers. Just pare it down to Ian Anderson's voice and guitar, and that means you're off to the next song, which starts the next section, the very synth-heavy Overseer bit. And at the end of that, heavy organ joins the synth, kind of an English folk-inspired thing with some skipped beats in the verses. And after a couple of times around, it morphs into something similar, only less heavy and more acoustic, but for just about a minute. Abrupt shift into a very Tull sounding section that features bright but heavily filtered and panned electric guitar and tambourine. With even more sax improv, this time in 7. And finally, the epilogue, which comes back to the "there was a rush along the fallen road" bit that showed up a couple of times previously before ending the album like this. After the first playthrough, I can tell you for sure that I need more time with this album before I have something approximating an opinion of this music. Okay, for starters, just a cursory glance at the layout shows me that the entire album might be arranged semi-palindromically, with the interlude right at the center, the forest dance on either side, and the prelude and epilogue bookending the whole thing. Which means maybe I should pay more attention to that silly little rabbit piece after all. Plus, I still need to read through the libretto and the playbill. Okay, give me a bit to digest all of this information. I'll be back in a few. Want anything from concessions? Twizzlers? You got it. Be right back.
I love John Evans' keyboard parts just more than I can even say. Thick as a Brick especially is what made me want to play Hammond organ. The piano and organ on Thick as a Brick sound phenomenal. His use of the Leslie, when to speed up the Leslie and when to slow it down, absolutely brilliant. And on A Passion Play, a lot more synthesizer stuff, all the analog synth stuff that is a lot of fun. This was the dense, indulgent progressive rock album I was looking for when I found it. When I was a kid, I don't know whether I had really gotten into Yes at the time or not. Emerson, Lake and Palmer, definitely. And I was immersing myself in all these Tull albums, and it definitely holds your attention for a long time. It's got a lot of mileage because, just the complexities of it. It's just so complex that I love it, and I know Eric loves it, and Barrymore Barlow's playing is so great. It's so Eric too. And we love it for all of those.
Sometimes the only way out is through. That seems to be what this whole thing implies. Well, to me, anyway. Look, the lyrics of A Passion Play are kind of dense, even occasionally impenetrable. But what I think I'm getting is an indirect retelling of the Divine Comedy, only with different timeline, several different viewpoints of the main character, and an altogether more ambiguous ending. So one of the consequences of that is that my brain has taken me in all kinds of different directions this week. First, there's the strictly instrumental parts of A Passion Play, which I think are fabulous. Anderson, Barr, Evan, Hammond, and Barlow all kill on this album, with stretches of the music going into full fusion mode, and I love that. The only complaint I might have in the music department has to do with the pacing. There's so much density and so little space between, it can be pretty exhausting to hear it all in one go. But the story, right, the play, the feeling that I'm getting from the addressing of gigantic metaphorical questions of morality and consequence, backed with both a sense of the performative, right, and the melancholy that such trappings evoke. It all reminds me of... Ooh, you're going to piss some folks off with this one, I bet. Well, it reminds me of the 2020 Thunder Lotus indie game Spiritfarer. The idea of the game is that you're the new ferry boat captain on the river Styx, and your job is to find lost spirits and help them to make peace with letting go of life, eventually leading them to the Everdoor. Now, before you get too dismissive of me comparing a classic work by one of the preeminent bands in the history of progressive rock to a silly little video game where you feed fried chicken to a ghost frog on a boat, let me tell you that the association of A Passion Play to Spiritfarer is a compliment of the highest order. Because playing Spiritfarer is one of the most emotionally intense experiences I've had with any art form in the past 5 years. I've played it all the way through 4 or 5 times now. It's become one of my go-to comfort games. It's amazing, y'all. It deals metaphorically with the concept of loss and does so with heart and depth. It takes the time to connect with you emotionally, and it leaves the interpretation of the final scene up to you. So for the last time this season, here's my final thoughts. On a scale of 1 to 10, I give Passion Play by Jethro Tull 10.08 to Paddington.
It all started at breakfast.
See you soon.